We are live for the fourth class in our series of sexual alchemy. Welcome to this class on my end, it's a cloudy Thursday afternoon. Welcome to this conversation where we are going to be further unpacking and exploring what the sexual wound is, and also looking at healing pathways that you can lean into to facilitate healing for yourself, to facilitate healing for your life, and to also step into states of expansion, of growth, and of evolution. For you who might be joining us for the first time, my name is Dumelo Mareri, and I am a Botswana-based womb medicine woman, spiritual healer, and an embodied leadership guide. Welcome. So in our class today, we kind of had a sub mini series within our bigger class series, right? So through this class series, we are just exploring the theme of sexual alchemy, all right? And over the past 2 weeks, including this current one, which is the third, we have been looking at 3 of the sources or the origins of the sexual wound, right? And so how our series unfolded, we ended up exploring each one of the 3 sources in its own individual class session, right? And we've been exploring each source or each origin of the sexual wound, while also exploring its healing pathways, right? So the intention was for us to have conversation on what the wound is, and also bring into that conversation what the healing work of that wound might be, all right? So just as a mini recap, right? In the series, we've been exploring 3 sources or origins of the sexual wound, right? So the first source or origin of this wound is limited and limiting conditioning around sex, sexuality, and our bodies, right? So we explore that in class 2 of the series. And then the second source of that wound is distorted programming around sex, sexuality, and our bodies. And we explored that in last week's class, which was the third class of the series, right? And in our session today, we're going to be exploring healing pathways for sexual trauma across the wide spectrum that this might occur, right? So we're going to be just briefly speaking on sexual trauma, and then for the bulk of our class today, we're going to be looking at those healing pathways that you can lean into to facilitate healing for those experiences that might have led to an imprint of pain and trauma, all right? And so just as a content warning, please know that this teaching will make mention of sexual trauma and the various ways in which it might manifest, right? And I'm mentioning this as an invitation that you lean into your resources of support, right? That you deeply resource yourself during this conversation, because I am aware that such conversation can stir up things that might be laying dormant, you know? It might bring up triggers which, while they can serve as an indication or an invitation for healing, they can be quite unsettling, all right? So just inviting you to deeply center yourself and to also deeply resource yourself, right? As we're stepping into this conversation, right? Beautiful. Yeah. So just allowing a moment of pause to take that in before we dive into the bulk of our conversation today. Yeah. So, as mentioned in our previous two classes, so we are all born with our sexual energy in its purest form and purest state, right? And one of the ways in which this pure state might be interrupted in its organic flow is when it is met with or by pain and trauma directly impacting on our creation or sexual centers, right? And this sexual pain and trauma that we're talking about may sit on the wide spectrum across which such pain may occur, all right? I think we spoke about this in the introductory class, right? Where we mentioned that this pain can sit on this wide spectrum, right? Right from microaggressions on the body to sexual harassment somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, and to more explicit like sexual violence that may be visited upon the human body, right? And so like we've had different experiences and we each know what we have moved through and what we have experienced, right? The invitation here is that if you suspect or know with certainty that this is pain you've encountered, then this serves as an invitation or as an opportunity to heal, all right? And today we're going to be exploring some of what that full spectrum healing work might look like, right? For you who might feel called to heal, for you who might feel this nudge to begin to step into your healing journey, for one of the deepest wounds that can be experienced or that can be encountered by a human being, right? So the sexual wound is actually one of our deepest wounds and our deepest pains as humanity, right? And part of why like we're also having this conversation is just to say that like healing is possible for this, because I think oftentimes we might sit in our individual spaces, right, sitting with the experiences that we have had, and sometimes without the hope that there might actually be a remedy, that there might actually be a pathway of healing for you to move through this, right? And so today we are going to be looking at what like the full spectrum healing work for this can look like, you know? And yeah, we have quite a number of pathways here. And the first one is womb healing work. And I am aware, I say this with the awareness that womb healing work is quite broad, right? And we can definitely get into like the specifics and the nitty-gritties of exactly what it is that you would heal when you're doing your womb healing work, right? But the womb healing work is necessary here in the case of sexual trauma or sexual violence, because the womb then sits as the site where the trauma occurred and as the space that might still hold much of the imprint of the pain, right, sustained through that experience that you might have moved through, all right? And so, like, we really cannot have a conversation on sexual healing. We can't have a conversation about healing the sexual wound or healing sexual trauma without also talking about the healing of our wombs as women and the healing of our sacral and creation centers as all beings, men included. All right. And the second pathway of healing here for sexual trauma is body healing, like healing for your body. And this is like quite like a multi-layered work, this work of body healing, right? And here we're wanting to facilitate healing for your body as the larger womb that was impacted by this experience, right? And so we're wanting to step into the appreciation that while we do have the womb that sits around our pelvic area, right, we're wanting to step into the appreciation and the understanding of our body as a womb, as well as the vessel through which we give birth to and we create our lives. All right. And so when we consider like the nature of sexual trauma, of sexual violence, of sexual wounding, it is a pain that, like, it cannot not happen without also impacting the body. So oftentimes, the things that wound our wombs also wound our bodies because our wombs sit within our bodies, right? And so accompanying that work of womb healing, we also need to hold space quite specifically for a work that will facilitate healing for your body, right? And here we're wanting to hold space to heal the pain that might still be held within your body, to alchemize, to transmute, to release the pain that might still sit within your body, all right? And another layer to that body healing work, like, we're also wanting to hold space for you to deeply look into, for you to come home to your relationship with your body. And if there might be any fractures within that relationship, if there might be any hurt, if the imprint of that pain, of that trauma might have in any way hurt your relationship with your body, then we want to facilitate healing for that. All right? And yeah, I love to pause so that we just take things in, right? So again, I know, like, these are not common conversations, right? And therefore they can be like quite difficult, uncomfortable to sit with, right? But like, there's a lot that happens to someone's being, right, in the face of such pain and trauma, right? Like, it impacts various layers of your being, yeah? And so when we're considering what the healing work might be for such a wounding experience, right, we want to take into account all the layers of your being that might have been impacted by this experience, right? Body healing is a big one. And yeah, there are quite a number of beautiful and juicy ways in which we can facilitate healing for your body, such that if you might have if there might have been that hurt in your relationship with your body, and also in your capacity to sit in your body, to live in your body. That's such beautiful and juicy pathways of healing that can facilitate that returning home into your body, such that you may begin to live fully within your body and access the medicine and the intelligence of your own body. All right? And closely linked to that, right? Like, we're talking about this body healing work being for the pain that might like still sit in your body as a result of this experience, right? Like, we're also wanting to facilitate emotional healing for the emotions that might still be present in your body, connected to that experience, right? Oftentimes when an event occurs, right, there'll be a lot of emotions, and because like really in our society, because those who raised us also didn't have the capacity and the awareness, there's really an education or a facilitated demonstration of what to do with the emotions that might emerge from different experiences, right? And so when an experience like this happens, there might be a lot of emotions that are then left unprocessed and that then remain stuck, like within our bodies and our emotional bodies, right? And so part of the healing work is to move through those emotions, to feel those emotions, and to then release them from your body, right? Such that, because you'll find that sometimes what still connects us to the traumatic experience might be these emotions that we have not processed, right? And so when we allow ourselves healing space to feel, to release, to transmute these emotions, we diffuse the charge of those emotions, and also we diffuse the influence that they have in our lives. All right, so that's a really, really big one. Like, an emotional clearing is a must, for any healing work, right? Because your emotional body is just one of the critical aspects of your being, all right? And closely linked to that, like what would also be great as a healing pathway is somatic work, right? This is very closely linked to body healing work and emotional healing, right? Because we want to go into the body and feel for the current state of your body, right? As the being that was impacted by this experience. Like, feel for the state of your body and begin to commune with your body, right? Feeling for what's still within your body, what needs to be moved, what needs to be released, what needs to be done to create a sense of safety within your body, all right? So we want to do that somatic healing work, right? Primarily to release the emotions that might still be held within your body, to create a sense of felt state, a sense of felt safety within your body, all right? Yeah, that is really key. Let's just take a pause there to take that in. And please let me know what might be resonating, and also let me know if there might be any questions, any thoughts that are emerging on your end. Okay, so another pathway of healing for sexual trauma. We've actually done a class on this before, although it wasn't as broad. Like this one feels more comprehensive. But in 2022 we did a class on spiritual healing for sexual trauma, right? And so if this is an area of interest for you, or something that you're deeply interested in healing, I would invite that you check out that class as well. It is also available on the podcast, right? So the fourth pathway of healing for sexual trauma is psychological healing, right? So we're stepping into full spectrum healing, right? And we are wanting to hold space for your emotional body, for your psychological body, for your spiritual body, for your physical body, all right? And so psychological healing would be for the beliefs, like for the wounded beliefs, limited beliefs, stories and vows that might have been formed or made in the moment of this painful experience, right? It could be vows, stories, beliefs about yourself, about your body, about your life, right? But typically when we go in there, we might find that in the moment or in the face of this experience, there might have been like beliefs that are formed that might grow to limit the manifestation of your life in a number of ways, right? And the thing is, like, when such an experience like this happens, right, it can even cloud our judgment of ourselves, like cloud our full view of who we are as beautiful children of the true living source God, right? Can cloud our sight of the magnificence that we are, right? And so if there might have been any beliefs, stories, vows, wounded, limiting beliefs, we want to allow space to dissolve those, to rewire them, and to come home to beliefs, stories about yourself that are actually empowering and that align with the beautiful life that you want to create for yourself, right? Yeah. And so within the scope of my healing practice, like, this work is possible either as a once-off session, right? You can book a once-off healing session for us to deeply dive into this work, or we can dive into an even longer journey through my private healing program, all right? Where we will even more comprehensively hold space for each one of these pathways, right? Like, do the womb healing work, do the body healing work, do the emotional clearings, do the psychological healing work as well, where we deeply dive into the beliefs, the vows that might have been formed, right? And we facilitate a clearing and a rewiring of those aspects of your mental and psychological landscape, right? So if this is a work that speaks to you and you want to do that healing work, please do check out these two offers. Both links to my once-off healing sessions and the private healing program are in my bio link, right? And the fifth pathway, I think we have about 7 here. So the fifth pathway, the fifth healing pathway for sexual trauma is spiritual healing, and this is right? And this is specifically for the parts of your spirit that might have been fractured in the face of this experience, right? And that might have ventured away from the home of your center, in the face of this experience, right? So we are wanting to do an excavation of these parts of self, and then we want to bring them home for a sense of wholeness, for a sense of completion within yourself. All right? And part of the spiritual healing work, like what's been coming up as well, like is also just a need for like a physical clearing, a physical cleansing of our energetic bodies, of our auric fields. All right? And this also connects to the generational or the ancestral healing aspect of this work, right? Because oftentimes when we step into this work, what typically emerges, not all the time, but most times, what typically emerges is patterns within the lineage, within the generational lines, right? So oftentimes when you have had such an experience happen in your life, you're often not the first one to experience this in your lineage. So this means that there might be like an imprint of trauma held within the lineage that keeps manifesting through different members of the different lineages, of the different generations, right? So then we're wanting to facilitate a healing for this ancestral miasma, like an ancestral disease, like a disease within the bloodline, right? And so that is also a part of the spiritual healing work, right? We are also wanting to facilitate a healing for, it's really like an opportunity for healing for the grandmothers and or the grandfathers who might have also experienced this during that time, right? So through your own healing, right, we may also extend this opportunity to heal for other members of the lineage, right, who might be ready to receive this healing, right? And this has actually been coming up quite strongly, all right, as I've been reflecting on this, that it truly is like a golden opportunity for us to facilitate healing, not only for us, but for the lineage as well, because oftentimes like sexual trauma or patterns of sexual trauma exist as like within the lineage as cycles of trauma, right? And so when you do your own healing work, you actually allow an opportunity for this cycle to end, for the cycle of trauma, for the cycle of pain to end for your lineage, right? And like the other side of the coin of such experiences is to see, like as difficult as they might be, the other side of the coin is to recognize the opportunity held within such experiences for us to end cycles of pain for our lineages. Like when something like this happens in your life, it can serve like as a sacred invitation to step up to the task and do the healing work for yourself, and indirectly also do that healing work for the lineage, right? And this is also just an appreciation of the various historical experiences that we have had, especially on the African continent, right? Like the history of slavery, the history of colonialism, periods of war, on our continent, right? Which have had like devastating impacts, right? Sexual trauma being one of them, right? And so part of us being our ancestors' wildest dreams is, and we can hold this lightly, all right? We can do the work while holding it lightly. But part of us being our ancestors' wildest dreams is us leaning into the healing work that they might not have been able to lean into during that time, and facilitating a healing for yourself and for the lineage, and thereby facilitating an expansion for the lineage. All right? And we also can't have this conversation without talking about some of the sexual trauma that happens within marriages, right? That can often go unacknowledged or just taken lightly, given some of the conditioning around the bodies of women and around the bodies of men, non-binary individuals, right? Because in some parts of the world, it is believed that the bodies of women belong to men or to their husbands, right? And so conversations, or it can just be difficult to seek help, right? When such a wounding has happened within a space such as marriage, which is supposed to be a sacred space and a safe space, right? And so there's an opportunity for us here to also consider the possibility of such trauma to actually occur in the home space. It actually mostly happens in the home space, right? And we then want to move forward with that, because the bigger invitation here is for us to heal, right? And we're wanting to acknowledge it so that we may grow the capacity and the courage to lean towards healing, right? Awesome. Okay. So maybe just a moment of pause before we continue. And we're going to be beginning to wrap this up, right? So if you might have any questions, any thoughts, please let me know, okay? Yeah. So within that full spectrum healing, like, we also need to hold space for inner child healing work, all right? And this can be two ways. It can be for the child version of you who sustained this trauma, right? And if you might have had this experience while you're already an adult, there's also still an opportunity for inner child healing, because there is ways in which such a wounding experience will impact on your inner child, right? And so that's also a critical part of healing work for sexual trauma, right? And another critical aspect of the healing work would be looking into and healing your relationship with the masculine or man, or your relationship with the feminine or women, given the gender of the person who might have hurt you, right? And so if you're a woman and the hurt might have been by a man, right? Like, we definitely want to look into your relationship with the masculine and your relationship with men, right? And if that relationship might have been hurt, if it might have been wounded such that it might have now resulted in difficulties, all right, in relationship with either the masculine or man, we want to facilitate healing for that. Yeah. And yeah, so like that's really about it in terms of what this full spectrum healing work might look like for sexual trauma, right? And this conversation brings to a close our exploration of what the sexual wound is, right? And what the sexual healing work will actually look like for this wound, all right? Because as I mentioned in a previous class, I think oftentimes when we hear the mention of sexual healing, right, our minds immediately rush to the physical act itself, right? However, the invitation of the series has been to deeply consider what the sexual healing work is for. Like, exactly what are we healing, right? And exactly what is this healing work, right? Yes. And before we close our class for today, I'd like for us to just consider another aspect of healing for sexual trauma, right? And it is that, given the understanding of the sources of the sexual wound, right? Especially the first two, like the limited and the limiting conditioning around our sexuality and our bodies, and then secondly, especially the distorted programming. Like, we also explored how this distorted programming can result in unhealthy manifestations of our sexual energy, and oftentimes this unhealthy manifestation can be violent in nature, all right? And so I had also shared this as an invitation for us to begin to consider the root of some of the sexual violence we see in our society, all right? So oftentimes when we have conversations about GBV, what I'm usually wanting to invite us into is to consider, like, what is the root? Like, what causes this? What causes a human being to perpetrate such violence on another? All right? And what's been emerging as one of those sources, only one, is this distorted programming. Some of the limited and the limiting conditioning around sexuality and our bodies, right? That will result in other members of our society feeling entitled to treat other members in a particular way, right? And so when we arrive with this understanding that some of the perpetration of the sexual violence flows from these sources of the sexual wound that we have explored, when we arrive with the understanding that the perpetration is actually also a manifestation of the sexual wound of people who have a sexual wound themselves and are therefore causing pain on others, we begin to see that a healing is also needed for the perpetrators of such violence, right? And so this brings us to the need for a healing for not only for victims of sexual trauma, but for those who are also performing these acts of violence, right? Because only one who is in pain can cause such pain, right? And we're wanting to step into this appreciation also. So we step into this with an energy of wanting to hold accountable, right? Members of our society, all members of our society, and also stepping into a higher and elevated understanding of what's happening here, right? And so also because of the nature of these sources of the sexual wound, it means that like no one is immune to the sexual wound, right? And when we come to the conversation of victims and perpetrators of sexual trauma, you and I could either be a victim or a perpetrator at varying degrees, right? We might hurt another in a sexual nature sometimes without even realizing that we did, or sometimes without meaning to, right? And of course, there are extreme cases where somebody might do it intentionally, right? But we're wanting to hold space here without shaming and without self-punishing, right? We're wanting to hold space for the appreciation that there's healing also needed for those who might inflict sexual pain or sexual violence on others. And this would be a healing for that which sits at the root of this behavior and this perpetration of the sexual pain. Okay? And so that's the invitation here within this conversation and within this work of healing sexual trauma, right? The understanding that on the one hand, we have individuals who experienced the sexual hurt, and we have individuals who perpetrated the sexual hurt, right? And there's an opportunity for both individuals, while again holding accountable all members of our society and all parties concerned for that behavior and for the ways in which they treat others, right? And so let's go think about that, okay? Let's go think about that and what that might mean for our individual lives, what that might mean for our broader community, given what we know, given what we see happening, what that might even mean for our families, given what we know, right? However, at the end of the day, our individual healing work rests upon us, like it's a decision that we each need to make, right? However, as you listen to this conversation, you know where you're at, right? You know what your experiences have been, and you know best what you might need, right? And so in closing, I would like to invite those who might be feeling called, like if you're listening to this and feeling called to go deeper with this work and heal. Please know that my once-off healing sessions are currently open for booking, so you can book a once-off healing session with me to go deep with this work and heal, or you can also apply for my private healing program to go even deeper. And yeah, I think in both instances, I would recommend that you start with the once of healing session, right? So that, especially if you haven't worked with me before, just to get to experience my container, right? And then decide if you might want to go for an even longer commitment, right? Yes. And so yeah, that feels complete in terms of what I wanted to share today. It's been such an honor to hold space for us to deeply explore this very important aspect of our being, right? As I mentioned, for self, right? Past three classes might have been dense, might have been heavy, because we are talking about the trauma itself, right? And what I also wanted for us to do is to also explore what the healing work might look like, right? While difficult, these conversations are needed, right? And especially for us as leaders. So we're also going to have a class where we're going to be exploring the significance of the sexual healing work for leaders, right? Yeah. And yeah, when we get there, we will unpack the nitty-gritties of that. Yeah. And until the next class, until our next session, please, just be gentle and extend yourself so much grace and so much compassion. Bye.